Take away your air conditioner. Take away your fan. Now imagine keeping your family alive through an entire summer in extreme heat with nothing but stone, animal materials, water, and your own knowledge. Sounds impossible, but your ancestors did it. And the methods they used reveal something surprising about how humans learned to survive environments they couldn't control. Because the first mistake is thinking ancient humans survived extreme heat by simply being tougher than we are. They weren't. Their bodies were still human. They still overheated. They still became dehydrated. And in truly extreme conditions, heat could kill them just as easily as it can kill you. The difference was that they didn't try to fight the heat the way we do. They changed when they moved, where they lived, what they wore, how they built, and when they worked. And once you understand that, extreme heat starts looking less like something they endured and more like a problem they learned to work around. Let's start with the simplest weapon they had: shade. Today, shade sounds almost insignificant. You stand beneath a tree for a few minutes and barely think about it. But without air conditioning, shade could completely change the conditions around you. Direct sunlight doesn't just make the air feel hotter, it adds heat directly to your body. Move into deep shade, and that direct solar load disappears. Your ancestors didn't need to understand the physics mathematically. They only needed to notice something obvious. Standing here hurts. Standing over there doesn't. So they built their lives around the difference. Trees became shelter, rock overhangs became shelter, caves became shelter, and eventually humans became extremely good at creating their own shade. This is where the stereotype of ancient humans starts falling apart. We often imagine prehistoric people simply reacting to nature. Rain comes, they get wet. Cold comes, they get cold. Heat comes, they sweat. But humans don't survive difficult environments simply by reacting to them. We modify them. A roof is artificial shade. A wall blocks sunlight. A carefully positioned shelter can reduce exposure, and an underground space can behave very differently from the surface above it. But there was another weapon that required no construction at all: time. Ancient humans could observe an environment for generations. They learned when the sun became unbearable. They learned where water remained longest. They learned which areas provided shade. They learned where air moved. And they learned that the hottest part of the day was often the worst possible time to do hard physical work. That sounds obvious now, but it's actually a powerful survival strategy, because one of the simplest ways to survive extreme heat isn't to cool your body faster, it's to stop heating it in the first place. Imagine hunting in the middle of a scorching afternoon. Every step costs energy. Every movement produces metabolic heat. You sweat more, you lose water faster, and the harder you work, the harder your body has to work to get rid of that heat. Now move the same activity toward the cooler hours. Early morning, late afternoon, evening. Suddenly, the same human body can perform the same task under less thermal stress. Your ancestors didn't need a weather app to understand this. They had something better: generations of experience. And that experience could turn the rhythm of an entire day into a survival system. The hottest hours could become slower hours. People could rest in shade. Work could shift toward cooler parts of the day. Travel could happen when temperatures dropped. And when darkness arrived, the environment changed again. The sun disappeared. Radiant heating fell. The ground began losing some of the heat it had absorbed during the day. The same landscape that could be brutal at noon could become much more manageable after sunset. So darkness wasn't simply the absence of light, it was a thermal opportunity. But none of this worked without another essential resource: water. Extreme heat becomes dangerous partly because the body has to get rid of heat. Sweating is one of the most effective cooling systems the human body has. When sweat evaporates from the skin, it carries heat away. But that system has a cost: water. So surviving in a hot environment wasn't simply about finding something to drink. It meant understanding the entire landscape around water. Where were the reliable sources? Which routes connected them? Which areas became dry during certain seasons? How far could a group travel before reaching the next source? In extreme heat, That knowledge becomes a survival resource by itself. You don't carry a weather app. You remember the landscape. You don't need a hydration notification. You know where the water is. And that knowledge could be passed from one generation to the next. One person discovers something. Children watch. Adults remember. The next generation inherits the information. Eventually, survival stops being an individual skill. It becomes cultural memory. That may be one of the most important reasons humans were able to spread into environments that initially seemed hostile. But there is another surprising adaptation: clothing. When people hear hot climate, they often imagine less clothing. It seems obvious. If you're hot, take something off. But clothing can also protect the body from direct sunlight. A loose layer can create a barrier between your skin and intense solar radiation. The goal isn't necessarily to make the body colder instantly, it's to manage the tiny environment immediately around the body. And that same principle appears in shelter. A good hot weather shelter doesn't simply block sunlight. It can create shade, influence airflow, and separate the interior from some of the temperature extremes outside. The most sophisticated solution isn't always the strongest wall. Sometimes it's simply the right position. Where does the sun rise? Where does it set? Which side receives afternoon sunlight? Where does the wind come from? Where does cooler air collect? These are simple questions, but when your life depends on their answers, you start paying very close attention. Over generations, that attention becomes architecture. And this is what we often miss when imagining prehistoric survival. Technology doesn't always look like a machine. Sometimes technology is a shelter placed in exactly the right location. Sometimes it's a sleeping schedule. Sometimes it's clothing. Sometimes it's knowing not to cross a landscape at noon. And sometimes the technology is simply knowing where the water is. Your ancestors were solving the same fundamental problem modern engineers still solve. How do you keep a human body within a survivable temperature range when the environment is trying to push it beyond that range? We use electricity. They used shade. We use air conditioning. They used timing, shelter, clothing, water, and environmental knowledge. We use weather forecasts. They used generations of observation. We can change the temperature inside a building. They learned how to change their behavior around the temperature outside. And perhaps that's the biggest difference. Not intelligence, not toughness, dependence. Modern humans have become extraordinarily good at controlling the environment around us. You can walk from an air-conditioned building into an air-conditioned car. You can drive to an air-conditioned store. You can sleep in a cooled bedroom. You can drink cold water whenever you want. The environment has been pushed away from you. For ancient humans, it was right there, every day, every season, every journey. And that pressure forced an extraordinary kind of intelligence. They had to notice. They had to remember. They had to predict. They had to cooperate. And they had to pass the knowledge on. Because one mistake in an extreme environment wasn't simply uncomfortable. It could be fatal. So the next time you walk outside on a brutally hot day and instinctively search for shade, remember something. That instinct isn't new. The shade isn't new. The water isn't new. The decision to wait until the temperature falls isn't new. For countless generations, humans survived not because they conquered heat, but because they learned when to move, where to shelter, what to carry, and when to wait. We didn't invent comfort first. We invented adaptation. And long before humans could control the temperature of a building, they learned something much more fundamental. If you can't change the environment, change the way you live inside it. That may be one of the oldest pieces of human technology there is. And every time you step into the shade on a scorching day, you're using it.